Hey everybody, welcome to this video. We are going to jump right in to talking about blending data and joining data inside Tableau. So the really primary use case here for you is that you have independent sources of data, and they have a couple things in common, probably dimensional columns like time or some kind of categorical information, as we'll see in a minute, that I have all set up in my own project. And you want to bring some of these independent data sources together. In Tableau, you have a couple of options. Really, I'd just be, let's keep things simple. Let's boil it down to three options. The first option, the one I like the most, get it done in the data. So before something ever hits Tableau, you put on your little SQL wizard hat or Python, ETL wizard hat, and you mix a little bit of this, crack some salt on it, sprinkle some pepper, get your data, prepped into the way that you want it before you bring it into your data visualization tool, which is Tableau. Kind of like, if you're going over to a friend's house or a family member's house for Thanksgiving, you probably already have your, I guess this one's just for the Americans out there. There's a thing called Thanksgiving, everybody else, where we get together and eat a lot of food. And, if you want to bring over all your ingredients and cook at the person's house, that's going to be complicated. Instead, you might just want to bring over a dish that's already cooked, and all you got to do is heat it up. All that to say, when you're working with your data in Tableau, you could bring all your raw sources into Tableau and then try to join and blend your way to victory. But that's kind of like bringing all the raw ingredients over to someone else's kitchen, and it's going to be a mess. You got lots of cooks in the kitchen. People start having arguments. Friendships crumble to a disastrous end. And maybe it's better that you just prepped that data outside of Tableau before bringing it in. If you're still with me here, all of this goes to say that my favorite option is get the data right before you bring it into Tableau. Okay, then we get to the two other options, which is what we're going to show here, which is sometimes you just have two different independent sources of data that already exist, and you just want to combine them in some way in a visual. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look first at blending. Then we're going to take a look at how you could accomplish really the same thing with joins. And let's dive in. By the way, we're looking at the Tableau documentation here in case you want to read all about blending and joining. So let's dive into something I already built before we build something from scratch. This is just to show you what I was kind of tinkering around with before I decided, let's make a video about this. What I'm doing here with this aggressively magenta circles laid on top of a blue line and a more squiggly gray line, what I'm looking at is pricing data. So pricing of specifically Bitcoin, and I'm just looking at this data over time, trying to see if there are any patterns that I could pull out of this just for my own fun and practice working with time series data. And what I ended up with was a few different data sets, and one of them is just per 5-minute timestamps. We have all the time, like all the data flowing in for Bitcoin, and it's just at a 5-minute granularity. So you see it at noon, then you see it at 12:05, you see it at 12:10. And then I refined that a bit in some other data sources to where we would use that data, but we would focus only on instances where you had a local maximum or a local minimum. So I don't want to explain too much of this because we would just want to talk about blending and joining, but let's see if I can just condense this. So we have raw pricing data basically up here, and then down here we have two different data sets that are refined versions of that pricing data. And local maximum and a local minimum isn't going to happen at every 5-minute timestamp. So what I might want to do is overlay on top of my raw data. So the raw data here is really just the blue and the gray line. And then this data set is much more sparse, this one that has these pairs of when the price swung from a local maximum to a local minimum, and that's where you're going to see these little magenta circles everywhere. So that's just to set the stage a bit. This is the data that I'm blending. And what I have in common between these data sets, we could actually just eyeball this. If I go into this data set up here, we can see I have some dimensions. I have symbol, symbol being what pricing symbol it was. In this case, we only have one symbol in this data. It's just Bitcoin. We have time and we have time frame. If we hop down into this data source, we have symbol, we have time frame, and then we don't have time. So we do have time lagger and time leader. Just for context here. Now forget about the context. I don't want to explain to you this whole thing. I'll make a different video for those of you who are interested in like analyzing cryptocurrency data and what I'm doing with this project. There are other videos on that. You can go watch them. For now, let's just stick with this blending, and let's call out that in these situations where you have different field names for something that actually should be corresponding or should be related between two data sources, that's fine. We just so happen to have a couple of these dimensions that do match up in name, symbol, and time frame. And then time lagger is not the same as time, but we'll see that we'll be able to still relate these data sources together, even though that column name isn't the same. So you've seen this. Hopefully it makes sense that I have some data that's that exists in two different kind of tables, and I want to combine them into a visual. And we're now saying, okay, we could do that. We can do that with blending inside of Tableau. We could do that with joining inside of Tableau, or we could say, you know what, we just need to join this data ahead of time and just get rid of all that stuff before it hits Tableau, which is really nice if your end users who are going to be connecting to the data are not the most technical and data savvy people. It's probably the best thing is to just get the data exactly as it needs to be into one table and then let the business analysts or whoever just go at it. In this case, I am the end user, and I don't care that it's not all combined yet. Okay, so let's hop into a fresh notebook where I have connected to these raw sources, but I haven't done anything else to it, just so we can see what this looks like when we start to blend. So let's start out with the raw data source here. There's a couple things I want to do to my data sources first. You'll notice that when I pull this in from the table, time is represented as a string. Let's just quickly see what this looks like. Let's go ahead and drag this over. Let's just see what this looks like. This is actually a timestamp. So it's showing up as a string in Tableau. And what I just wanted to show you there was that we can go ahead and change this to a date and time so that we can get this nice kind of, Tableau will actually treat this column like a time variable now. And let's go ahead and do this for these other data sources as well. Or let's see, wait, which one am I actually demoing here? So max to min, let's just do that one. We don't really need to worry about this other one since it's not part of the demo. Okay, so let's go ahead and make time lagger a date and time. Time leader is a date and time. And from here, let's just try to build a visual. So out in this, we have the blue line here is a smoothed out form of the price, and the gray line is the actual raw price itself. The blue one is what we call exponentially weighted mean, kind of similar in concept to a moving average or a rolling average. And so we can see it's much smoother than the actual pricing data. Take some of that noise out of the signal. And we just can plot both of these from the raw data source. So let's do that. Let's bring time up here into columns. Gonna drop this as continuous. By the way, this little trick, if you just drag time up here and you just drop it, Tableau's gonna guess what you want. It usually guesses, in my case, wrong. I'm on a Mac, so I'm holding the Option key while I drag this. But if you're on a Windows computer, I think you would hold Control. So we drop this in here, and I can select time continuous. That's going to give me the version of the time data that I want. Now let's just drag our actual raw close price in here, and I'm going to bring in the exponentially weighted mean, and drop that onto the same axis so that we get this this pretty terrible looking visual right now. Let's go ahead and filter the time down a wee bit to maybe, let's say, July. I like summer. July 20th to July 22nd. This should give us a more reasonable subset of data. Let's also just make this not include 0. Okay, so now we actually have something to look at as we start trying to blend some data together. Probably the best data visualization you've ever seen. You're welcome. So let's now, whoops, got this back. I'm just OCD about this. I'm gonna have to make this blue, and this guy can be gray. Okay, because I want the one that stands out to be the one I actually care about in my analysis, which is this smoothed out exponentially weighted mean, and not the actual noisy price. Okay, so now let's get to blending. We want to blend in our data from this other data set, and I could go ahead and try to do this. Just let's say I don't know anything about Tableau and I have this data source connected. I say, awesome, I'm connected. Let me just drag in my price. Let's just say close EWM mean lagger, which means nothing to you, but we can just bring this in and let's just try to join this in with the data. This just doesn't look right. This looks not like what I'm seeing out here. Not only because it's a red line and not this beautiful, aggressively magenta little circle, but it's just flat. So what is happening is up here you can see this blue check mark and this orange check mark. Just to expose the secrets of Tableau here, the blue one is going to indicate your primary data source. This data was in here first. The data that gave me my timeline, this lovely gray and blue line, that came from this data source that provided data to the worksheet first. It's also worth pointing out that this is at the worksheet level. So just because this is the primary data source and has the blue check mark next to it in this worksheet, that doesn't mean that in another worksheet that's going to be the case. For example, I just opened a new worksheet and we can see none of these little data sources have any check mark next to them. It's a clean slate. Anybody could claim this sheet. So out here, Tableau distinguishes between your primary and your secondary data sources with the blue and the orange check marks. Now you can also have multiple multiple secondary data sources. So if I wanted to, I could try to bring in data from this guy as well. And it's probably not going to go well for me in terms of visualizing anything at this point. But you can see that, okay, if I bring data in from other data sources, this one that was here first remains the primary data source with its blue check mark. And then any of these other secondary data sources get that orange check mark. All right. So let's just drag out this data that just isn't ready to be blended at this point. And let's say, what would I need in order to bring the data in from here? What I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go up here to data, and I'm going to, so by the way, I hovered up to the, the toolbar or whatever, the menu of Tableau, and I said, give me my blend relationships. So down under data, you can edit your blend relationships. And this is going to allow you to define how you would want your data to be blended if you were sprinkling a little bit of this data source on top of this other data source. What does that really look like? And so the primary data source, Tableau's picking up in this context, the primary data source is this that provided data to the sheet first. That's correct. Now I'm going to choose the data source that I'm planning on blending data in along with that other data that I already added to the sheet. And that one's going to be this max to min data source. And we can see that under the automatic selection, sometimes some fields will show up here. Like if there's something super easy for it to pick up on, like, oh, this column is the exact same name as this other column in both of the data sources, well, then automatic is probably going to have your back. It's going to know what you want to do, and it's going to say, all right, we line these up for you. In this case, I don't have any of these things mapped yet. I'm just going to go ahead and add symbol should map to this guy that got a weird name for whatever reason. In the data, it's just called symbol, but now it's symbol v prices. That's the name of the view. Okay, in any case, yeah, symbol should map to symbol. I could add another relationship here. I'm going to say that time should map to time lagger. And why did I choose this time instead of this one? Just be aware that this is pointing to the same variable. Both of these are time in that primary data source, but this one is giving me discrete date parts, like month. You can see that it's just saying May. Minute, it's just going to be a number. So if your date happened to be May 31st, at 12:01 a.m., minute would just be 1, because that happened at 12:01, but it doesn't care about the hour, doesn't care about the day, just cares about the minute. So in general, like if you have actual time stamps you're trying to blend in, just go with time, like the continuous version, as opposed to specifying date parts. However, if you just want to, like if one data source is aggregated at like the quarterly level, like you have quarterly sales, and then another data source has data at the daily level, well, then you might want to blend based on quarter, some kind of discrete time unit. In any case, this is the mapping I'm going with here. And we could also add other dimensions if we needed to. But for this example, let's just leave it as is. So we click OK, and now we can see out here that we have a link already. Like when we're looking at a secondary data source, you get this little chain link. If I'm in my primary data source, well, this is the one that already claimed the sheet, so it's everything's eligible. All these different fields can play with this worksheet, no problem. But when we click on the secondary data source, it's telling us with these little links, hey, you've got a link right now. If you were to bring data in from the secondary data source, we would blend it on time. Now that might not be what I want. Let's say I had multiple symbols. Like I told you before, right, in this data, I only have Bitcoin. So if I look at this, we can see this only has one member. But if I had multiple symbols, then I might also want to make this link on symbol so that when I blend my data in, I'm not just blending at the time level, I'm also blending at the level of symbol. If you don't do that, and there are multiple symbols in the picture, then you're just going to end up getting probably higher numbers than you would expect, because it's just taking from the secondary data source. As far as it's concerned, anytime the time matches, all those values get counted in that basket. But then if I inform it like, don't just blend on time, also blend on time, but treat Bitcoin differently than Ethereum or something like that, treat category A differently than category B, where that category exists in both your data sources, well, then you'd want to click on this little link. Okay, so let's just click that link. And now I can bring in some data and blend it. So let's bring in the closing price according to the lagger metric here, which, since this is my max to min data set, the closing price, the average lagger, just means that since it goes from maximum to the minimum value, my lagger is the second one, that's the minimum. So all these little circles I'm seeing up here represent a moment in time where we have completed a cycle of going from a local maximum to a local minimum. Again, don't want to get lost in the weeds explaining that, because you might just care about blending and joining data. So let's stay on topic. And now we can see, even though this is still red and it's not that wonderful magenta, or I've been calling it aggressively magenta, we get the point. We're getting the same results that we have in the other sheet. So we've blended in data. Great. So let's see now how joining works. And just to wrap up on the blending, why would you want to do joining if you can already do this with data blending? Going back to my that Thanksgiving kind of metaphor or analogy, The thing is with blending your data, you're only ever going to bring your data in at a certain level of granularity. I think when I used to teach Tableau trainings, I once made this comparison of blending the data is kind of like going out to a restaurant where you're seated at a table with a bunch of people you don't know, and you could have a conversation. You could talk about the weather. You could talk about, safe things. You're probably not going to bring up the most controversial politics of the moment, blah, blah, blah. You're going to save that for more if you're having an intimate conversation with friends. And when you're blending your data can't do kind of intimate friendship conversation type stuff, like level of detail calculations between data sources and stuff like that. So you are a bit limited when you're blending your data. You're really best suited for blending when you're in a situation where you have data that's at different levels of aggregation, and you only need to do some simple combinations of the data inside a visual. Otherwise, if you're reaching for more out of combining that data, I'd highly recommend going the route of get that done in the ETL layer before it ever hits Tableau. But what if that's just not in your wheelhouse? Maybe you're not a data engineer kind of person. You have these two different data sources. You know how to get them in Tableau, and that's where you're comfortable. Then you can do the joining step. So let's get into joining, and we'll go into a completely new sheet, and we're going to go into this join demo data source, because whereas with blending, we have different data sources that we combine together in an ad hoc kind of way. With joining, we're really going to be making a data source that is no longer just itself, but has kind of a marriage between a bunch of different data sources and brings it all into one place. So let's do this. We have this view that we start with. Now let's just join in data from this max to min data source. And instead of it being two different data sources, it's going to be one happy data source at the end of the day. But first, we have to define some things. How is this data being joined? So this is very similar to that editing the relationships for the blends. Here we can even see edit relationship for the join. And we are going to first, let's say, join on symbol. So just like how we were joining on or blending on symbol in that other example, it's probably a good idea for you to figure out which dimensions do your data sources have in common and join on those. Otherwise, you might end up with this kind of many-to-many relationship. Like if I didn't join on symbol and I just joined on time, I know I already mentioned it, but all of the data associated with that time would all get joined in for every single row where it finds a match for that time. But that might not be what you want. You might want to say, okay, I want the time to match, but I also want the symbol to match, and I also want the country to match, and whatever other things that you want to match on, join on. Okay, so we have the symbol in there, and then the other thing we care about is time. And we don't just want the string version of time. See, this is something that's really nice that Tableau has, is I can make a calculation on the fly here. So I can say, take the date time of our timestamp. So that time comes in as a string, and we're going to convert it to a date time object. And now we want to join that with what? Oh, sorry. Messed this up. Let's make sure that we have this as symbol. Now we need to add another step in the join. So we join on symbol, but we also join on time. Edit this calculation to be date time conversion of time. And then over here in this data source, we want to join on that time lagger. Again, this is local maximums moving to local minimums. Every row in this data source is a pair where it says you had this local maximum and it then led to this local minimum. So time lagger represents the timestamp that the minimum happened, and we want to also convert this to date time representation. Click OK, and now we have these relationships in place. Let's see. relationship clause contains an invalid calculation. Well, that's not good. Let's see. Which one of these is the culprit? Date I'm. Nice. Okay. So now we've seen that I'm a human, just like everybody else. Make plenty of mistakes. Now let's go ahead and close this. Let's close this. Let's hop into our worksheet. And this is what this data source is going to look like now. Now you have these two different tables that have been joined together, and they exist within the same data pane. Whereas before we had independent data sources that we would blend together in a kind of less a more informal way. Now with the joining, we've said here are the exact relationships. I want every row of this data to be joined. And let's just take one other look at this. Make sure we have everything right. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, so now let's make that visual happen again. So we're just going to take time from this data source, just like we did before, where we started with this data source, then we blended in this one. This time we're just going to use time from here, as we did before, and then without having to blend, we're just going to bring in the data that we want. So let's see. We also want time to be filtered. Range of dates, let's say July 20th again to July 22nd. And we want to bring in the close price. We want to bring in the smoothed out version of the close price. And then we want to bring in, notice without having to do any blending, we can just come down here and we can say, yeah, give me the close price that we landed on whenever that maximum swung to a minimum. What was that point in time and what was that minimum price? And so we can do that. And if we synchronize our axes and we don't show zeros, now we can see, also let's just fix these colors or my head will explode. Let's make close price be gray, the smoothed out version be blue, and this one can stay red. Okay, so now we can see if we go over here into sheet 1, we have this view. You can see where all these red dots appear. If we go into sheet 3, we have the exact same thing. So blending, joining, or getting it done in the data outside of Tableau. Now you've seen it actually happening in some real data. And if you're curious about this pricing data and actually like what the hell's going on with all this, tune into some of these other videos because we're going to be diving into kind of like how to do some interesting analysis around this time series data that's here in this cryptocurrency pricing data, and my attempts at trying to detect patterns in that data, as well as how various things come together in Python and whatnot. But until then, hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it taught some people out there who are always curious about blending data and joining data in Tableau, got them one step closer to feeling super comfortable with that. And hope to see you guys out there in the Tableau community.